Hello, creative and crafty people. I hope y'all are doing well today. In this video, I'm going to show you how to make a gorgeous bracelet with just 2 lengths of wire, a handful of beads, and 3 tools. I've shown you a similar style of this bracelet before, but today I wanted to show you how you can mix different types and shapes of beads to give it a different look. I'm going to use Imperial blue Jasper beads and Topaz colored crystal Bicone beads. So now, if you'd like to see how I make this bracelet, stick around and let's get creating. The materials you'll need for this project are a piece of 18 gauge wire cut at 26 inches or 66 centimeters, a piece of 20 gauge wire cut at 13 inches or 33 centimeters, 13 round 6mm Imperial blue Jasper beads or beads of your choice. We'll need 12 Topaz colored 4mm crystal Bicone beads, again, whatever color you'd like, a pair of looping pliers, a pair of chain nose pliers, and a pair of flush cutters. These materials are measured out to fit approximately a size 6.5 to 7 inch wrist. If you need it to fit a smaller or a larger wrist, you'll need to adjust accordingly. If you missed something, you can always go back and rewatch this part of the video, or you can check out the description of this video below. Now let's get started on this project. Grabbing my 18 gauge wire, I've made a mark at the center point of that wire, and my looping pliers. I'm going to place that center mark on the 9mm barrel of these looping pliers. Now we're going to wrap that wire around the 9mm barrel, making our loop. We're going to cross those wires over each other until these wires are horizontal with each other, like so. And then we're going to pull the piece off of the pliers. And now we've got a perfect circle or the loop. And I'm going to grab my chain nose pliers and grab both wires at the same time directly above that center point. So there you could see my center point, and I'm grabbing directly above that point. And I am going to take both wires, the ends of the wires, and point them straight up from my loop. Like so. Make sure you grab both of those wires. You don't want it to slip out, because we don't want to deform this loop. And make sure we get those wires pressed up as close to each other as possible. Then, readjusting the pliers, I'm going to bend both of these wires so that they're up close to each other, as close as we can get them so there's no space between those 2 wires. And once you get them up against each other, we're going to grab the 20 gauge wire and we're going to wrap around the neck of this piece or those 2 18 gauge wires together. And we're going to wrap 3 wraps to begin with here. So there's 2 wraps. And then I'm going to grab my chain nose pliers and grab the smaller tail of this 20 gauge wire and wrap it as snug as possible around the neck of this piece, like so. And now I'm going to press the 2 wires up above my wraps to make sure they're laying side by side, like so. And now with my flesh cutters, I'm going to snip off the tail end of the shorter piece of that 20 gauge wire. And then I'm going to burnish the end of this wire down to my piece so that we don't have anything to get snagged on. Then we're going to push those wraps all the way down and splay apart the 18 gauge wire. That will trap those wraps down at the base there. And then grabbing the 20 gauge wire, I'm going to pull that up in between the two 18 gauge wires, like so. Now taking my 6mm Imperial blue Jasper bead, we're going to thread that right onto that 20 gauge wire, like so. We're going to push it all the way down until it hits those 18 gauge wires, like this. Now taking the right side of that 18 gauge wire, I'm going to wrap it up and around the bead and over the 20 gauge wire. And then I'm going to grab the left side of my 18 gauge wire and wrap it around and behind the 20 gauge wire. So you have one wire in front and one wire behind. Now I'm grabbing my 4mm Topaz colored crystal ab bicone bead. And we're going to thread this onto that 20 gauge wire like so. And then we're going to push it all the way down to that 18 gauge wire yet once again. And we're going to wrap this little 4mm bead just like we did the 6mm bead. We're going to wrap it around that bead over the 20 gauge wire. And the right side is going to wrap around and behind the 20 gauge wire. And you want to continue with the same pattern the whole way up. And there you can see we've got that topaz wrapped in there, topaz bicone bead. And now with my chain nose pliers, I'm going to grab the wire and make a little point to mimic that bicone bead. So we're going to make little diamond shapes around the bicone beads with this wire. So here I'm going to do the same thing on the other side by grabbing the wire and then flattening and making a little sharp bend right at the point so that that bicone bead sits right in the middle there. And you can see that I've made that little diamond shape around it. Now we're going to grab the 6mm Jasper bead again. And we're going to thread that on. Just like we did the first one, let it fall all the way down to that 18 gauge wire. Again, we're going to bring it around the Jasper bead in front of the 20 gauge wire, and then the left side around that Jasper bead behind the 20 gauge wire. And you want to kind of keep this facing forward. These wires will want to twist toward the right if you're doing it this direction. If you're doing it the other direction, it'll twist toward the left. So grab your 4mm bicone bead, thread it onto that 20 gauge wire, slide it down, and then again wrap around your bicone bead from the right side over the top of the 20 gauge wire, then the left side around the bicone bead behind the 20 gauge wire, not like I did in front here. You can see I did that wrong. And here in just a minute I will realize my mistake. So there I'm creating the point around the bead. And here I'm going to adjust it. I've realized I put that on the wrong side. So here we go. And now we've got it all ready for the next 6mm Jasper bead. So grabbing that next 6mm, Imperial blue Jasper bead, I'm going to thread it onto my 20 gauge wire, pushing it down to the 18 gauge wires. Again, grabbing that right side of the 18 gauge wire, I'm going to wrap it around the Jasper bead in front of the 20 gauge wire. And grabbing the left side of that wire, I will wrap it around the Jasper bead behind the 20 gauge wire, like so. And grabbing my next 4mm Bicone bead, I'm going to pop that on, like so. Push it down to the 18 gauge wire. And again, wrap around this bead. So grabbing my 18 gauge wire, I'm going to wrap this around over the top of my 20 gauge wire, like so. And then I'm going to grab that left wire, 18 gauge wire, wrap around the Bicone bead behind my 20 gauge wire, like so. Then using my chain nose pliers, I'm going to create those little bends in the 18 gauge wire to mimic that Bicone bead or make a little diamond shape in this wire. Sorry, I'm going off screen a little bit there. And there we go. Now, with the magic of video editing, I'm going to show you the next little bit. So there's the first 3 beads, and look how beautiful that looks so far. And here's the next 6 sets of beads, and so on until I get the 13 Jasper and 12 Bicone beads put on there. And I'm left with just this bit of wire. And so now we want to end this piece, and I'm going to bend that 20 gauge wire off to the side, like so. And we are going to create our clasp or our hook. So I'm going to grab the right side of this 18 gauge wire and point it straight up. Bend it into that 90-degree angle straight up from the bead, directly over the hole. And then we're going to do the same thing on the other side. We're going to bring those wires up as close to each other as possible, because we want those wires to sit side by side. Like so. And now we're going to take the 20 gauge wire and wrap around both of those wires 3 times, mimicking how we started this entire bracelet. And I'm going to use the chain nose pliers to help me press those wraps down as close as we can to these wires, keeping those 2 18 gauge wires side by side. We don't want them to be on top of each other. And there you can see we've got 3 wraps across the front. And then I'm just going to push those wraps together. Get them all nice and neat and snug. Like so. And then I'm going to grab my flush cutters. And we're going to cut the tail end of this wire off at the center of the back of this piece. Like so. And now with the chain nose pliers, once again, we're going to burnish the tail end of that wire down onto the back of this piece. Like so, making sure you can't feel the edge of that poking up. And here you could see this bracelet is a little over 7 inches in length. And now we're going to take the 2 tail ends of those 18 gauge wire and push it toward the back of the piece at about a 45-degree angle. And then grabbing my looping pliers, we're going to wrap this around the 5mm barrel. So here you can see I'm wrapping that around there and bringing the tail ends right back up against the bracelet. And there you can see we've made our little hook. And we're going to grab the flush cutters and we're going to cut right at the middle of those wraps. So at the second wrap, you want to make a little cut and cut the tail ends of the pieces off. And then with my chain nose pliers, I'm going to grab the tail ends of this wire and just make a slight little bend outward, like so. Now I'm going to take my file, which I did not include in our materials list. But there you go. There's the file. We're going to file the ends of these wires just to make it so it's not so jagged and a little bit smoother so it doesn't catch on things like sweaters or anything like that. And there you can see the finished bracelet before we've shaped it. And there's the side view and the back view. And now we're going to shape this bracelet, and you can use a bracelet mandrel if you have one. I don't. I just generally use my hands and shape it the way that I see that it will fit nicely. I tend to do more of an oval shape. Most wrists are oval shape. Some are a little bit more round, and you can make it round. Whatever your preference is. So here I'm just slowly pressing it into shape and going in and past a little bit, like so. And now there's about a 1/2 inch of space between the clasp and that loop, and you kind of want that so that you have a little bit of a spring back where it pulls. When that clasp goes into the loop, it snaps back into shape. So there you can see how easy it is to clasp this bracelet. And this is a little big on me, but it's very cute and very elegant. And then to undo it, you just press and push down, and there it comes off that easily. And there is your completed bracelet. What did you guys think of this project? What kind of beads would you use in your bracelet? Let me know in the comments below. Also, if you have any questions and didn't understand something, feel free to reach out and ask. I'm definitely able to help you as best as I can. I hope y'all enjoyed watching this video, and I hope that you can create a piece of your own. Thank you all so much for all of your support. I've reached a new milestone this week of over 2,000 subscribers. Thanks, guys. If you haven't already, please subscribe to my channel if you enjoy my content. It's free and it helps me out. And by giving my video a thumbs up, it pushes my videos out to more creators like yourself. Thank you once again. And we'll see y'all next Thursday.